Okay, hello again. So this is part 2 of our discussion on trigonometric substitution. And for the following two examples, we will solve integrals wherein the forms that we have seen earlier, yung may square root of a squared plus u squared, etc., they are not readily seen in the integrand. So that's the question we want to solve now, no? So what if these three forms are not apparent in the integrand? One way to remedy that would be to use completing the square. So to complete the square in this trinomial ax squared plus bx plus c, what do we do? Our first step is to add and subtract by b squared over 4a. No? Where in this case, what's your b? Your b is the coefficient of x, no? And your a is the coefficient of x squared. Okay? So we add and subtract by this term here. And then after doing that, what do we do? Essentially, yung gagawin natin next is to group together all terms that will comprise a perfect square trinomial. So group together the three terms that will form a perfect square trinomial. And then after that, you now factor that resulting perfect square trinomial. That will be your u squared ngayon. And then the remaining terms that we did not group together, those are constants, and then their sum is your a squared. Okay? So let's now proceed with this example. Example number 3. Let's find the integral of this one. So like I mentioned, itong integrand natin na to, it's not apparent, no, that it's of the form a squared plus u squared, a squared minus u squared, or u squared minus a squared. Instead, yung gagawin natin is pipilitin natin, no, na maging kahawig niya yung form na yon. Okay? So let's consider this x squared plus 2x minus 15, and let's complete the square in that trinomial. So you have x squared plus 2x minus 15 here, and then you add and subtract again by b squared over 4a. Ano yung b natin? Yung b is the coefficient of x. Tama ba? In this case, the coefficient of x is 2. So your numerator is 2 squared. And then divided by 4 times a. What's your a here? It's the coefficient of x squared, which is 1. Right? So your denominator will be 4 times 1. Right? And then you subtract by the same thing. So we add by 2 squared all over 4 times 1. You subtract by the same thing. And then let's simplify this. Yung 2 squared, it's 4. Tama ba? Divided by 4 times 1, it's again 4. So 4 over 4, that's 1. Okay? So to this trinomial, we are adding and subtracting 1. Okay? And then what's the next step? You now gather together the terms that form a perfect square trinomial. And just to guide you on what terms you will group together, yung laging yung i-group together are these two variable terms. They're always together. You have x squared plus 2x. And then itatambal nyo together with x squared and 2x are one of positive 1 or negative 1. And yung choice nyo, kung ano yung group together nyo with these two, will come from the sign of x squared. Okay? In this case, ano yung sign ni x squared? It is positive. Tama ba? So of 1 and negative 1, ano yung kasign ni x squared? In this case, it is 1. Tama ba? So you group together x squared, 2x, and positive 1. Okay? These three will comprise the perfect square trinomial. And then let's simplify the terms that we did not group together. In this case, it's negative 15 and negative 1. Negative 15 minus 1 is 16. Okay? And then let's factor. So x squared plus 2x plus 1, that is x plus 1 quantity squared. Okay? And then minus 16, that is, of course, 4 squared. And as you can see, this is now of the form u squared minus a squared, where your function u is x plus 1, and your a, that's now equal to 4. Okay? So we now have u, we now have a. We're now ready to perform trigonometric substitution. And in this case, ano yung ililet natin kay u, which is x plus 1? In this case, your integrand is of the form u squared minus a squared, no? So variable squared minus constant squared. What's our trigonometric function? It should be secant. Okay? So our x plus 1, it's now equal to a times the secant of theta. In this case, 4 secant theta, where your theta belongs to either quadrant 1 or quadrant 3. So from 0 to pi over 2 or from pi to 3 pi over 2. Okay? And then the next step is to express this integrand here in terms of theta. Tama? Let's start with dx. How do you get dx? You look at this equation, no? And then you differentiate both sides of the equation. If you consider the left-hand side, what's the derivative of x plus 1? Of course, the derivative of x is 1. Plus derivative of 1, it's 0. 1 plus 0 is 1. And then times differential dx. 1 times dx is just dx. Okay? So this is your left-hand side. And that's now equal to the derivative of the right-hand side with respect to theta this time. What's the derivative? You get 4 sa labas. times derivative ng secant theta, it is now secant theta tangent theta. Okay? So 4 secant theta times tangent theta and then times d theta. That will be your right-hand side ngayon. Okay? So your dx, it's now this one in terms of theta. So okay na to. Let's now consider this one. Let's now express this in terms of theta. So ito, the square root of this one, remember this trinomial when we completed the square, it's equal to this. Tama ba? So this one, that's just equal to this. Okay? Tapos if you now replace x plus 1 with 4 secant theta, what do you get? So si x plus 1, di ba that's 4 secant theta? You square the result, you get 4 squared times secant squared theta, and then minus 4 squared. Okay? And then factor out 4 squared, you get 4 squared times secant squared theta minus 1. Okay? And of course, square root ng 4 squared, that's 4. And then times this one. Okay? And then what happens now when you use identities? So secant squared theta minus 1, that is tangent squared theta. Tama ba? So you get square root of tangent squared theta, which is technically equal to the absolute value of tangent theta. Pero since your theta belongs to either quadrant 1 or quadrant 3, tangents of angles in both of those quadrants are positive, pwede nating tanggalin ngayon yung absolute value. So this is now equal to 4 times the square root of tangent squared theta, which is now equal to 4 tangent theta lang. Okay? So this one in terms of theta, it's just 4 tangent theta. Okay, we're now ready to integrate this one. But first, let's take note of our substitutions. Yung x plus 1 is this. Yung dx is this one. At saka ito is equal to 4 tangent theta. Okay? So if you now integrate this one, what do you get? Yung dx natin, di ba, it's equal to this. So your numerator, it's now 4 secant theta tangent theta d theta. And then your denominator, which is this one, itong square root ng x squared plus 2x minus 15, it's just 4 tangent theta. Okay? So what happens? 4 will cancel out. Tangent theta will cancel out. What we're left within the integrand is just secant theta. So this will just be equal to the integral of secant theta d theta. And what is this equal to? What is the antiderivative of secant theta? So just recall from a result in Math 21, this is equal to the ln of absolute value of secant theta plus tangent theta plus c. So if you forgot what the antiderivative of this one is, then I suggest you catch up by watching the corresponding YouTube video. So this should appear in the YouTube videos before. Okay? So the integral of secant theta d theta, it's equal to this one. And then the last step would be to convert these in terms of x this time. Okay? So we want to express secant theta in terms of x as well as tangent theta. So if you want, there is nothing stopping you from using right triangles to solve this. Pero take note, in this particular example, you have secant theta in terms of x and tangent theta as well in terms of x. So for secant theta, all you have to do is divide by 4. Yung magiging secant theta natin ngayon, it's now x plus 1 over 4. And then your tangent theta, that's now this one, all divided by 4. Okay? And you're done, no? Your antiderivative ngayon, it's now equal to this. Okay? Okay, next, let's solve this time a definite integral. So let's determine the integral from 0 to 2 of this one. So again, it's similar to the previous example, where you have to complete the square in this trinomial, 3x squared plus 6x plus 12. Let's do that. You have 3x squared plus 6x plus 12. What will happen to that? Let's add and subtract again by b squared over 4a. In this case, what's your b? What's the coefficient of x? It's 6. Tama ba? So your numerator is 6 squared divided by 4 times a. Pero what's your a in this example? In this case, yung coefficient ni x squared, it's 3. Okay? So your denominator is 4 times 3. Okay? And then you subtract by the same thing. So what will happen now? Ang 6 squared, that's 36. Tama ba? Divided by 4 times 3, that is 12. So 36 divided by 12, that should give you 3. Okay? So to this trinomial, we are adding and subtracting 3. Okay? And then ipunin ulit natin yung mga magpa-perfect square trinomial and yung mga constants. Okay? So again, lagi nating itatambal itong dalawang to, itong dalawang variable terms na to. And to these two, ano yung itatambal natin? Si 3 or si negative 3? In this case, it should be 3. Okay? Kasi remember, the coefficient of x squared, it's positive 3. So itatambal sa kanya yung kasign niya, which is again positive 3. Okay? So let's group together 3x squared plus 6x plus 3. Let's also group together the remaining, the constants 12 minus 3. Okay? Tapos ito, let's factor out the common factor which is 3. Tapos simplify natin si 12 minus 3, that should give you 9. Okay? Now, what's x squared plus 2x plus 1? That is x plus 1 quantity squared. Tama ba? So you have 3 times x plus 1 quantity squared. Tapos if you write all of that as a square in itself, you should get square root of 3 times x plus 1, all raised now to the power 2. Okay? And then plus c9, that is now 3 squared. Okay? So this is now of the form u squared plus a squared, where your u is equal to square root of 3 times x plus 1, and then your a is now 3. Okay? So you have u, you have a, you can now perform trigonometric substitution. So what's your u now? You let u, which is this, be equal to what? This is variable squared plus constant squared. So the trig function involved should be tangent. Okay? So this one, it's now equal to 3 times tangent theta, where your theta belongs to quadrant 4 or quadrant 1. Okay? So from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Okay, so what happens next? Let's now express this one in terms of theta. Okay? So your dx in terms of theta, what do? Again, you differentiate both sides of this equation. On the left, ano yung derivative ng 3 times x plus 1? So square root of 3 lalabas. Derivative ng x plus 1 is 1. So square root of 3 times 1, that should give you square root of 3. And then times differential dx, that should give you square root of 3 dx. That's your left-hand side. Okay? Samantala, yung right-hand side, which is 3 tangent theta, when you differentiate in terms of theta, what do you get? So lalabas again si 3, tapos derivative ng tangent theta, that should give you secant squared theta. Okay? So on the right, you have 3 secant squared theta d theta. Okay? And when you divide both sides by square root of 3, you get now dx in terms of theta. So okay na si dx. Okay? And then for this one, si 3x squared plus 6x plus 12, what will happen to that now? So ito, si 3x squared plus 6x plus 12, when we completed the square, it's equal to this. Tama ba? So this one, it's equal to this. And when you perform the necessary substitution, itong square root of 3 times x plus 1, which is 3 tangent theta, I won't show this in full anymore. This should be equal to 9 times secant squared of theta. Okay? So I'll just leave this to you. Please perform the necessary derivations by hand. Okay? So just do the same thing we did before. So replace, factor out, perform identities, you should get this. Okay? So okay na to and okay na to. Pero take note, we are evaluating a definite integral this time. So you have here limits of integration for x. Pero since you changed variables from x into theta, dapat the limits of integration must change accordingly. Okay? So let's start with the lower limit, x equals 0. So to get the corresponding limit for theta, let's consider again this equation. So when your x is equal to 0, if you replace x by 0 dito, you get 0 plus 1, that is 1. Okay? And then times square root of 3, you get square root of 3 on the left. That's now equal to, of course, 3 tangent theta. Okay? And then when you divide by 3, you get tangent theta equals square root of 3 over 3. So you're looking for an angle theta, again in quadrants 1 or 4, that will give you a tangent of square root of 3 over 3. So in this particular case, yung tangent theta natin is positive, no? And tangents of angles in quadrant 4, they will be negative. So quadrant 4 is out of the picture. So you're looking for an angle in quadrant 1 that will give you a tangent of square root of 3 over 3. Okay? And in this case, yung magiging angle natin, it should be 30 degrees or pi over 6. Okay? Remember, yung theta natin dito must range from 0 to pi over 2, no? So acute angle siya. It should be theta equals pi over 6. Okay? And in fact, you can verify this, no? Kasi diba tangent theta, that's sine theta over cosine theta. Ang sine pi over 6, that should give you 1/2. Tama ba? Divided by cosine pi over 6, that is square root of 3 over 2. So 1/2 divided by square root of 3 over 2, that gives you 1 over square root of 3. Rationalize, you'll get square root of 3 over 3. Okay? So your corresponding lower limit for theta is pi over 6. Next, let's consider the upper limit, x equals 2. So replacing x with 2 in this equation, you should get square root of 3 times 2 plus 1, or 3 square root of 3. That's now equal to 3 tangent theta. Okay? And then if you divide both sides by 3, you should get square root of 3 equals tangent theta. Okay? So again, similar to this one, you are looking for an angle in quadrant 1, an acute angle, whose tangent is square root of 3. And that angle will turn out to be 60 degrees or pi over 3. So remember what sine pi over 3, that's equal to square root of 3 over 2. Tama ba? Square root of 3 over 2 divided by cosine pi over 3, that's 1 half. Okay? So square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1 half, that will give you square root of 3 alone. Okay? So the tangent is square root of 3. Okay, we now have our limits for theta. This is all expressible in terms of theta. We can now integrate. So let's just take note of our substitutions here. So itong integral natin in terms of theta is 1. So again, corresponding to 0, you get pi over 6. Corresponding to 2, you get pi over 3. So this new integral is now from pi over 6 to pi over 3. Okay? And then yung dx natin, what do? We take this equation, divide by square root of 3. You get dx equals this one all over square root of 3. Okay? So you get this one. And then for this one, yung 3x squared plus 6x plus 12, it's 9 secant squared theta. Tama ba? And if you square all of that, ang 9 squared is 81, times the square of secant squared theta, that should give you secant to the fourth of theta. Okay? Tapos labas lang natin muna yung mga constants. You should get this. And then you get this one for your integral. Okay? Pero what's 3 over 81? So 3 divided by 3 is 1. 81 divided by 3, it's 27. So if you take out that common factor, you should get this constant outside to be 1 all over 27 square root of 3. Okay? And then for the integrand here, if you simplify using the laws of exponents, what do you get? You get secant raised to the power 2 minus 4 of theta. Pero 2 minus 4 is negative 2. So secant theta raised to the power negative 2, that's just 1 all over secant squared theta. Okay? Pero what's 1 over secant theta? Di ba secant reciprocal ng cosine? So 1 over secant squared is cosine squared. Okay? Tapos for the constant outside, if you rationalize by multiplying and dividing by square root of 3, 1 times square root of 3 is square root of 3. Ito, times square root of 3. So square root of 3, square root of 3, that's 3. Times 27, that should give you 81. Okay? So you now integrate an even power of cosine, no? So let's just recall yung ginagawa natin to integrate even powers of cosine. Yung ginagawa natin is you write cosine squared theta as 1 plus cosine 2 theta. Okay? So you have square root of 3 all over 81. And then the integral of, if you use half angle identities, you should get 1 plus cosine 2 theta all over 2. Okay? So always remember that, ang cosine squared theta, that's 1 plus cosine 2 theta all over 2. Okay? And then labas lang natin yung 1 half from all of this. You get square root of 3 all over 81 times 2 is 162. Okay? And then times the integral of 1 plus cosine 2 theta d theta. Okay? So you have square root of 3 over 162 and then times the integral of all of this. So ano yung antiderivative ng 1 with respect to theta? That should give you theta. Tama ba? For cosine 2 theta, I'll just leave this for you to verify on your own. If you let u be equal to cosine of 2 theta, perform the necessary u substitutions, you should get 1 half times sine 2 theta. Okay? Kasi yung mangyayari dito essentially is this will become 1 half cosine of u. Ano yung integral ng cosine of u? That should give you positive sine u. Okay? Pero your u is 2 theta. So sine 2 theta and then times 1 half sa labas. Okay? Yung 1 half sa labas na yan, that will come from your computation of du, no? Kasi kapag 2 theta ang u ninyo, your du will be 2 d theta. Divide both sides to get d theta. Okay? That will give you a 1 half here. So I'll just leave you to verify this on your own. Just compute the substitutions by hand. Okay? So you have here theta plus 1 half sine 2 theta evaluated from pi over 6 ngayon up to pi over 3. Okay? Tapos, what do we do to evaluate this definite integral? You replace theta here with pi over 3 minus the same thing with theta replaced by pi over 6. Okay? So you have this one, square root of 3 over 162. And then times this one with theta replaced by pi over 3. What do you get? So your theta is now pi over 3 and then plus 1 half sine 2 pi over 3. Okay? And then minus the same thing with theta replaced by pi over 6. So theta is pi over 6. And then minus 1 half sine 2 pi over 6. Pero 2 pi over 6, that simplifies 2 pi over 3. Okay? So our final step would be to simplify all of this. Let's simplify. You get square root of 3 over 162 sa labas. Tapos what's pi over 3 minus pi over 6? So what's 1/3 minus 1 over 6? Ang 1/3 ay 2 over 6, no? So 2 over 6 minus 1 over 6, that's 1 over 6. And then times pi, you get pi over 6. Okay? And then for this one, you get 1 half times what is sine 2 pi over 3. Yung sine 2 pi over 3, that should give you square root of 3 over 2. Tama ba? So square root of 3 over 2 times 1 half, that's square root of 3 over 4. Positive. Okay? And then minus 1 half times what is sine pi over 3? Ang sine pi over 3, that should be again square root of 3 over 2 times 1 half again. You get minus square root of 3 over 4. And then these two will cancel out, leaving you with this one, and then times pi over 6. Tapos when you simplify, you get pi square root of 3 divided by 6 times 162. Ang 162 times 6, that should give you 972. Okay? So that's pi square root of 3 all over 970. Okay, so that's it. Let's conclude part 2 with this set of exercises. So again, for practice, I really suggest you answer these exercises. And for the remaining part, for part 3, yung gagawin natin ngayon is we will consider examples with your u being arbitrary functions of x. So we will have, say, u equals e to the x or u equals ln of x. So just watch out for that in part 3. Okay, that's it for part 2. Thank you all for watching.